Panic at the Disco has been one of my all-time favorite bands for as long as I can remember. I own all of their albums on vinyl and CD. I've owned countless merch over the years. I've watched just so many interviews and videos of the band just to get a better idea of who they were as people. One of the reasons why I became a performer and studied theater in college and decided to do stuff in front of a camera is because I wanted to be Brendon Urie. I'm a pretty big fan, is what I'm trying to say. So when they broke up in 2023, I was bummed. And when I heard they were going to be performing again for one night only at When We Were Young Fest, I was so excited. But that performance is in October of 2025. That might as well be a lifetime away. What are fans to do when they need that sweet, sweet Panic at the Disco fix? Lucky for you, I have a solution. What the fuck is going on? Hello and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, I'm Trevor and I am eternally uncool. I make videos about music, music culture, and anything that interests me. But mostly music right now. So if that sounds like something you'd be into, then I highly recommend subscribing to the channel and watching the rest of this video. Panic at the Disco is probably one of the most beloved bands of the 2000s emo and pop punk scene. They released undeniably classic albums like A Fever You Can't Sweat Out and Pretty Odd, as well as having a very unique aesthetic early on that mixed something like Cirque du Soleil with a Hot Topic staff. Panic's influence can still be seen today in some of the more theatrical areas of pop punk and emo, as well as some of the more glitzy, Las Vegas-inspired pop. Bands like Set It Off and Palais Royale have a distinct Panic influence. And pop acts like 5 Seconds of Summer have that sleek pop production that harkens back to albums like Death of a Bachelor and Pray for the Wicked. But are there any bands that sound like Panic at the Disco? Or have the same vibe? We all want Panic to come back in full force, especially if it involves Ryan Ross. But I don't think that's happening anytime soon. Brendon seems pretty content with being a dad and playing drums for Mike Viola, so we need that Panic at the Disco fix. We're just fiends for it. Yeah, you could listen to the classic albums and singles, but what if I told you that I have some bands that are a good placeholder for Panic at the Disco?
Would you believe me?
I don't believe you.
What we're gonna do today is take a look at a few bands who could possibly fill the Panic at the Disco shaped hole in all of our lives. I'm gonna try to avoid bands that were spun off from Panic at the Disco. So you're not gonna see the Young Vanes or I Don't Know How But They Found Me. Instead, I'm gonna look at newer bands, or maybe lesser known bands that have a Panic at the Disco vibe to them. If you like Panic, then you're bound to enjoy at least one of the bands on this list. With all that being said, grab a drink, grab a snack, possibly some Thanksgiving leftovers. I know I had turkey for dinner tonight. Get comfortable, and let's get into the video.
I chime in with the haven't you people ever heard of?
I've said before that Marianas Trench has a Fall Out Boy and Panic at the Disco vibe, with their mixture of modern pop production, theatrical elements, and Josh Ramsey's vocal style that is comparable to Patrick Stump and Brendon Urie. But I feel like there's more of a comparison to be made.
Hallelujah, up for ransom. Whoa, cash value for hashtag anthems.
Early on, Marianas Trench had a very theatrical pop punk vibe with albums like Masterpiece Theater and Ever After. The songs were undeniably catchy and poppy, but they also had something uniquely theater about them. It reminds me of how Panic had a definite pop-punk sound on Fever, but how those songs also had defined hooks and were radio ready. I mean, sure, songs like Desperate Measures and I Write Sins Not Tragedy don't sound like they have any similarities on the surface, but when you distill them down to their essence, they are both pop-punk songs with a touch of flamboyancy, theatricality, and pure songcraft. as Mariana's Trench matured, so did their sound. Swapping the emo sounds of Ever After and Astoria with the more pop and synth pop sounds of Phantoms and Haven. This is similar to the way that Panic at the Disco switched up their more alternative and emo sound into something a little bit more synthy with albums like Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die. But both bands still somehow managed to retain what made them special in the first place. That theatricality and dedication to musical performance and experimentation. Songs like I Knew You When and This Is Gospel wouldn't sound out of place if they were played one after each other on a playlist.
I've been loving you too long to just suddenly move on from this.
I think it also has to be said that Josh Ramsey and Brendan Urie are two of the best vocalists of all time. They both have such unique voices that it's hard to mistake them for anyone else. They're both also just great pop songwriters, with Josh Ramsey co-writing the massive Carly Rae Jepsen hit Call Me Maybe, and Brendan writing some of Panic's massive pop hits like High Hopes. Mariana's Trench feels like Canada's answer to Panic at the Disco. They've had similar careers with similar sonic experimentation, going from something that's more pop punk and emo to a little bit more alternative rock to a little bit more synth pop. If you enjoy Panic at the Disco's later stuff like Pray for the Wicked, or even something like Vices and Virtue, you'll definitely find something to enjoy with Mariana's Trench.
I chime in with a haven't you people ever heard of?
One of Panic at the Disco's most beloved albums is Pretty Odd. With this album, Panic at the Disco tried something different from their debut and set themselves apart from some of the other emo bands at the time who weren't really experimenting. They ditched the emo clown vaudeville of Fever and instead adopted a 60s British invasion sound. This was confusing to a lot of people at the time. But Pretty Odd is now seen as a modern classic by many pop punk and emo fans.
And you know that you feel it too, 'cause it's 9 in the afternoon.
And I know I said I wasn't going to talk about the Young Veins, but I feel like with this entry I kind of have to a little bit. Because the Young Veins share a lot in common with Pretty Odd era Panic at the Disco. That classic sound inspired by the Beatles and the Beach Boys, a retro aesthetic, and the songwriting of Ryan Ross. Both bands really sounded like they could have been from the mid-60s with their sounds. That's what struck me about our next entry. HOA, or HOA, I'm gonna call him HOA. I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong. HOA is a South Korean band who play a kind of retro rock that wouldn't sound out of place on an oldie station. I first discovered them when their song I Don't Know Why was recommended to me on YouTube. I usually don't listen to K-pop or K-rock that much. Not that I don't like it, it's just not really my thing. I never really found a K-pop or K-rock band that really stuck with me. But that all changed once I heard this song.
I don't know why, waiting no lie, please don't be shy. I want your heart, tell me more.
This song is exactly the kind of 60s pop rock that I grew up loving. There's something just so sunny and fun about it. It really sounds like these four young dudes from South Korea took the sound of the Beatles and Jan and Dean and just replicated it perfectly. After that, I started keeping my eyes and ears open for more. Usually when I find a band that has a retro sounding song and I look into more of their music, I just end up disappointed. It's like that one song is the outlier. But HOA did not disappoint. The next song they released, Pushman, was even better than the first.
I should take care of it, but I don't belong here. I don't want it to be. I'm the pushman who wants to live here.
I know whenever I talk about Pretty Odd or the Young Banes, I tend to bring up the Beatles a gross amount of times. But Pushman really reminds me of the Beatles when they were still kind of poppy. You know, before the experimentation and drugs and stuff. It really sounds like Taxman or Paperback Writer. They released a song not too long ago called Tomorrow and Tomorrow, in parentheses, I Love You.
I love you.
Which features a kind of softer, romantic sound. It's definitely the love song out of everything they've released thus far. It really does sound like this slow dance song that would be played at like a 60s homecoming.
Tomorrow and tomorrow I love you.
HOA is one of the bands that has really been exciting me in 2024, and I really hope to see more of them in the future. They have a retro sound that fans of Pretty Odd era Panic and the Young Vanes will definitely love. So if that sounds like your vibe, check out HOA.
I chime in with a haven't you people ever heard of?
I'm on Reddit a lot, probably too much. I use it to get my music news and talk with other like-minded music fans. I usually just frequent the subreddits of bands I like, My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy, and of course, Panic at the Disco. And one of the posts on the Panic subreddit that caught my eye was about a musical project that a lot of people thought sounded similar to Panic at the Disco. This project was called Fish in a Birdcage.
I'm a fish inside a birdcage. My brother always sings me songs.
I don't know much about Fish in a Birdcage. I couldn't find that much information on them. From what I could gather, they're from Calgary, Alberta. Another Canada band, nice. And their sound can be classified as modern Renaissance meets electronica and folk.
Do I have your attention now?
Fish in a Birdcage definitely has an interesting sound. If I had to compare it to any Panic at the Disco era, I think it would have to be somewhere between Fever and Vices. They both share a very vaudeville-inspired sound with strings and over-the-top theatricality, while also having this underlying emo-ness.
And right now you're mine. Oh, mine.
There's also some songs that have a lot of electronica and pop elements that really remind me of Too Weird to Live and Death of a Bachelor era Panic at the Disco.
The ring you'll find, it's a fight for your life, a choice to make a fist or lay down on the sidelines.
Like I said, I don't know much about Fish in a Birdcage. They still seem fairly low-key and niche, but I will say that they do have a flair for the dramatics, similar to a lot of Panic at the Disco's work. Whether it be the more circusy stuff or the more poppy stuff. So if you're into all that, then I highly recommend checking out Fish in a Birdcage. They have a YouTube channel, you can check out all their stuff.
I chime in with a haven't you people ever heard of?
When Panic at the Disco started out, they really set themselves apart with their sound and aesthetic. Instead of sounding like all of the other emo bands that were coming out in the 2000s who were very punk and hardcore influenced, they had a more cabaret theater style. And instead of looking like every other band in bootcut jeans and v-neck t-shirts, they wore elaborate costumes and makeup. I think this really helped them in the long run. It kept people interested in this weird little Las Vegas quartet. A band I found that is similar to this era of Panic at the Disco is a band called Sarah and the Safe Word.
Rest in peace to the me that you had in your head. Rest in peace to the me that you had in your head.
Sarah and the Safe Word are a dark cabaret/gothic rock band from Atlanta, Georgia, formed in 2015 by singer Sarah Rose and guitarist Keenan Dietrich. They've been gaining some buzz for their sound that takes influences from 1920s cabaret, as well as being advocates for the LGBTQIA+ community. Sarah and the Safe Word definitely have a unique sound for a band in the late 2010s and early 2020s. Not a lot of emo bands have really been going for that kind of vaudeville cabaret style. But Sarah really took it and made it something a lot more interesting. They incorporate string instruments like the viola and violin, as well as a piano that sounds like it was lifted straight out of a saloon. And Sarah Rose's vocals are so expressive and engaging. It's hard not to listen to her.
Red hot and holy, could you touch me like you told me?
Sarah and the Safe Word, much like HOA, are one of the bands that I've been really getting into this year. Their sound is interesting and unique, mixing the alternative rock and emo sound that I've always loved with the cabaret style that has always intrigued me. So if you like Fever era Panic at the Disco, then I highly recommend checking out Sarah and the Safe Word.
I chime in with a haven't you people ever heard of?
When I was in high school, let's say 2012 or 2013, I remember riding in the car with my parents and listening to the radio. And out of nowhere, a song comes on that reminds me of one of my favorite bands, but it wasn't them. The singer sounded so much like the singer of one of my favorite bands, and the vibe was so similar to what my favorite band was doing at the time that it was hard not to see a resemblance. It was this kind of uncanny valley type of thing. Obviously, the favorite band I'm talking about is Panic at the Disco, because this is a Panic at the Disco video, but the band on the radio was a band called The Unlikely Candidates, and the song was Follow My Feet.
And the high road's dead in steep, and the low road's easy and deep. Guess I'll follow my feet. Guess I'll follow my feet.
The Unlikely Candidates are a indie rock band from Texas that mix a Beatles influence with a bit of electronica and alternative rock. They've been active since 2008, but they've never really broken into the mainstream like some of the other indie rock bands from around that time. But they've always been a band that I just can't forget. And I think it has a lot to do with their similarities to Panic. Songs like the aforementioned Follow My Feet, as well as the song Trampoline, really show the similarities between the Unlikely Candidates vocalist Kyle Morris and Brendon Urie.
Don't want me to draw and scream at the sonics. Trampoline, up, down.
And I don't think Kyle Morris was trying to rip off Brendon Urie. I think that's just how the dude sounds. But you can't deny that they sound similar. Unlikely Candidates would switch up their sound a bit as their career progressed, going in a much more indie pop direction. And even some of their popular stuff reminds me of some of Panic's popular stuff. A song like Novocaine sounds like it could have been a Too Weird to Live B-side.
Novocaine, I keep it coming so I feel no pain. I tell my girl that I'ma change my ways. She knows I'm never gonna change.
The Unlikely Candidates deserve a lot more love. They're a really good indie band that's been grinding for years. So if you like the more indie pop side of Panic at the Disco, I highly recommend giving the Unlikely Candidates a listen. What do you think? Are you a fan of any of these bands? Or did I just give you some new stuff to listen to? Let me know in the comments. That's gonna do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then I highly recommend smashing that like button and sharing this video with everyone you know. I am a small, independent content creator who pretty much does everything on his own. So every like, every comment, every share, any interaction with this video at all really helps me out a lot. With all that being said, thank you for watching. As always, I'm Trevor. Stay uncool. And that's the end of the video. Goodbye.